Welcome back to a look into the future. What would you do if you go off into the future and ask yourself questions about how to grow your firm, how to transition to advisory services, what to do next, what should you have for breakfast today? Luckily, we can just ask Paul, the time traveler himself, almost all of those questions. Because Paul learned the knowledge we needed our firms to evolve into advisory services and become the most relevant advisor to our clients already in the past. Paul brings three amazing things with him. Number one, he's built a successful accounting practice in the UK. So he understands accountants. In fact, he built his firm into an advisory powerhouse, which sold for $45 million in 2001. Number two, he's taken a business public, building it to a market value in excess of $400 million. So he really understands what business owners need and value and what we as accountants need to provide to them. And finally, as I said, number three, we don't need to invent the flux capacitor. We can just ask Paul and learn from the transition he made 20 years ago in the UK into providing business advisory services, as that trend is here today in the United States. I'm Garrett Wagner, your Entrepreneurial CPA channel host, and I'm excited to be joined by the amazing, the legendary Paul Latham of Hay & Rock Solutions. Paul, welcome back as always, and I want to continue on our amazing viewer Q&A session. And now today, we're going to talk about your favorite topic, my favorite topic as well. Something we talked about before. We're talking about there's three types of business tangibles. Let's dive into that, the three types of business tangibles and why the last one's the most important.
Hi, Garrett. Yes, this is definitely one of my favorite topics, has been for 20 odd years. First thing to say is that intangibles are massively important in any business. It's a fact that the average business, 80% of the business value is represented by intangible assets, which means you won't find those assets on the typical balance sheet. Or putting it another way, that means in terms of the traditional balance sheet and traditional balance sheet accounting, they're only about 20% right. And those sort of words that represent the intangibles, it's usually these days words like knowledge, expertise, creativity, solutions, data, relationships, brand, culture. The common feature of all those words, they're incredibly difficult to touch. You just can't touch them. And so step one is to recognize that it's the intangibles that are important. But then you have to go on to recognize there are three sorts: gas, fluids, and solids. The gas, usually, if somebody has some sort of a concept of something intangible, usually it starts in their head. It's a really, really important first step, but that gas inside your head, it's great, but you can't make any money out of it. So the way people then typically move on to make money out of an intangible is to move on to what I call fluid stage, or it could be liquid. And how it works in most businesses is what you do is very fluid. In fact, it's almost liquid. And typically, the business owner is usually the person who holds it all together. It's sort of like the glue that holds all these fluid moving parts together. So, things like, this is what we say to win work, the value proposition. This is what we now need to do. And it's sort of a process, but not quite. And so what you say is fairly consistent, and what you do is fairly consistent, but it's pretty fluid. It's not solid. And really, I think the key thing there with fluids is, and it's how most small businesses start, it's a great way to produce income for a small business. Just like, for example, a partner at a CPA, they sell themselves. But the key point there is they're selling themselves. They're not selling a business asset. The business certainly doesn't own the asset. What the business typically does is employ a clever person, like a CPA partner or a CPA employee, and they use their knowledge and skill and so on. But if that person were to ever leave the business or retire or whatever, all the clever stuff and the intangible stuff walks away with them. And so whilst it's good for producing income, it has absolutely no capital value to the business. Does that make sense, Garrett?
Yeah, I mean, you're describing no typical CPA firms and businesses. The owner tries to do things, is do it themselves, and maybe they get really lucky, and like you said, they get that middle phase where it's fluid, it's liquid. They're doing some things, they're saying some similar things, but there's usually one or two people, one or two partners, one or two owners that really drive it all. Everybody knows without them, it's all going to fall apart, which means they've started to get some value together out of that business, but it's never scalable. And when I looked at my own life and my own pivot from working inside a CPA firm to consulting with CPA firms, this is something I personally took to heart of how do I make sure I build my business? How do I build C3 Evolution Group to be past that liquid fluid phase where it's not just me and Dr. Sean doing smart things and saying smart things and doing this, but build a process and team around it so we can be successful. We're not just constantly busy. I think that's the other pivot there is you can be very smart and fluid, make a lot of money, but you are forever busy. And that's where I love that next step.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where you're moving to that solid stage, step 3. Because if you, and most business owners do want to do this, if you want to partly leverage so you can do more of it, but ultimately create long-term capital value, then you've got to make that transition from sort of almost like renting the assets, so that renting the employee, paying them a wage, but recognizing they can walk away and take all their clever stuff with them. What you have to do is you have to make it a solid asset that's owned by the business. It's owned by the business, and you make it so you feel like you can almost touch it. The most common examples are probably, technology is easy. You know, technology in a business sort of forces you to create a fixed process. But any process, I mentioned a couple before, the value proposition or how are we going to deliver or do it, you've got to really make that owned by the business, and so that everybody does it the same way. And if you do that, it sort of tends to follow that you also create a brand that's owned by the business, because we can be very confident, oh, well, this is what they say and this is what they do. And suddenly what you've got is a brand that's based around what the business does, not the personality of the individual. I talk about those, you probably heard me before, talk about partner in the bottle brands, where they built a brand around the individual, not around what they actually do or the value proposition. And ultimately, those 3 types of intangibles, gas, very, very important, fluids and liquids, absolutely all small businesses, that's how they start. But make it solid, step 3. Successful businesses create solid intangibles. It almost certainly, for the average business, it's 80% of what you're creating. Make it solid.
Yeah, I think it's really important too when you look at what kind of life do you want to have as an owner of a company, as an owner of a firm, even applied to us internally. Hey, if you don't want to be just constantly busy, constantly working all these hours for the rest of your life, say you're 30 right now, and what's my next 6 years look like? If you can solidify that and put a process and team and a system in place so it runs and it's going, if you've solidified that intangible, you're not just that smart person that has to show every day to make it work.
Absolutely.
You've got a successful business.
Yeah, just, sorry, butting in there, Garrett. I remember back in my accounting day, I might think I'm 10 out of 10 good at doing something. I used to boast a lot, but now I'm perfect. But if you can get everyone following the same process, they may not be quite as good as you with that little bit of personality, but they'll probably be 8 out of 10 as good as you. And no matter how hard you try, if you try and do it all by yourself, there's only one of you. If you can get 10 people, that's 8 out of 10 good. That's the equivalent of 8 times leveraged what you can achieve. And that's how you grow a business. It's by having that solid process allows them to become 8 out of 10 good.
And that's the goal. How can you not be consumed by the work and be way better than you were? So Paul, I love to hear that you were at one point perfect. You were a 10 for 10. You've since stepped back and now you're kind of, expanded on past that. But that's the goal. That's why it's one of our favorite topics for both of us personally. Solidify those intangibles, solidify your life, add value to what you do, and don't be tied to your job. Great ending notes right there. So Paul, thank you as always for the time. I always walk away learning something, and I know our audience will as well. And in talking about solidifying the intangibles, you might wonder, how solid is the intangible at our firm? Are we moving in the right direction? You probably don't know where you stand. That's why it's important. Take a minute, sign up for your own free biz survey. Get a free objective assessment of how prepared your firm is for the future and whether or not your intangibles have been solidified. It's a special offer for watching the show. We'll provide you the results, and I'll personally get on the phone with you and have a quick review meeting, as Paul likes to say, to review the results, to see where you stand. There's a link below. I encourage you to take the test. See how ready you are for future success and how solidified your intangibles are. Thank you as always for watching. Please click to subscribe to the YouTube channel. And remember, we challenge you, take action today to change the world and invest in yourself.